Well, the conversation around universities and colleges is a perfect segue to our next panel, which is going to be a conversation around how universities can lead the Web3 trust revolution. So please join me in welcoming Len Evanchik, who's a professor at my alma mater, Boston College, Matt McCormick, who's with the higher education practice at Grant Thornton, Sol Nasisi, who's a co-founder of Chainletter Labs, also a professor at Bentley University. And this conversation is going to be led by Jahon Jamali, who's the founder of the American Crypto Academy. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Testing. All right. 5 p.m. Let's get those folks drifting out in the hallway in here. The party's not over. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you very much. My name is Jahon Jamali. I am the founder of the American Crypto Academy. Let's tell you a little bit about what we do. We do Web3 education program development for universities, organizations, professionals, as well as provide a learning management system around that. We've obviously all seen the commonality in some of the themes today, and some of them are a bit similar to what they've been in the years past. And I want to tell a quick story that sort of elucidates this point. A couple years ago in Las Vegas, I got to go to a pitch dinner with Kevin O'Leary, right, Mr. Wonderful from like Shark Tank. And I was there with about 50 other crypto enthusiasts, entrepreneurs, and they were all giddy to give him a pitch, and everybody surrounded him, and everyone wanted to know what was like the highest risk or the most daring project that people were working on, and everybody sort of went through trying to impress Kevin. Well, a few of us raised our hand and said, you know what, we're not working on anything particularly risky, but it's the whole in all of your projects. Nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. Education, right? You get wrapped up in terms, acronyms, technical jargon, and lexicon, and you, as an industry as a whole, we all know education has been sort of like the big hole or the big elephant in the room. So I'm very excited to be leading this panel today, talking to 3 exceptional leaders in education. From campus to consensus, how universities can lead the Web3 trust revolution. And as Ian mentioned, I'm going to give them a quick intro and let our panelists say a little bit about themselves. But we have Professor, we got Professor Len Evanchik from Boston College. We got Matt McCormick from Grant Thornton and Sol Nasisi from Bentley, as well as Chainletter Labs. Excited to have everybody here today. So Sol, I'm going to start with you and we'll work our way down. Why don't you give the audience a quick intro and tell us a little bit about you and blockchain and education.
Thanks, Jahon. Hi, Sol Nasisi, Chainletter Labs, and we're a company that provides a really fast, easy way to stamp truth onto the blockchain. One of our first products that we're rolling out has to do with digital credentials, and universities are one of our customers. So I'm also the executive director of digital marketing at Bentley University.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Len Evanchik, and I'm a professor at Boston College at the Carroll School of Management. Let's see. At BC, at the Carroll School, I teach both graduate and undergrad students, MBA focused as well. And I teach courses on the strategic use of technology and analytics as sort of a core throughout the years. But then depending on the term and the year, I also teach a course on cybersecurity management and the business applications of blockchain. As it relates to the business applications of blockchain, what I try to stress throughout those courses is that with any new technology, and this is the important point, you can either improve current business processes, or if the technology is of a certain type, you can create new markets and new businesses. Basically create something new from that with the new tech as a foundation. And that's why blockchain definitely fits into that model. So my background also is in administration at other universities here. And the second point would be to understand how this technology is used throughout the university, both the research as well as the academic and the administrative. So look forward to speaking with everyone.
Great, thank you very much, Len.
So I'm Matt McCormick. I'm with Grant Thornton's higher education group. I'm very excited about this panel today because it's kind of an intersection of my 2 passions, education and blockchain. So I've been with GT for about 5 years now, but prior to that, worked for a couple ed tech startups for 4 years in Boston. And then before that, I was in China for 5 years, helping Chinese students go abroad to universities around the globe. So that's kind of my education background. And about that time in China is when I discovered Bitcoin. And I've been kind of looking my nights and weekends since then, trying to figure out, is there a currency out there that people actually use, as opposed to just holding it, hoping the price goes up in dollars. So excited to kind of discuss those today.
Fantastic. So today we're going to cover sort of 3 core areas, and we got questions within that. I'm going to let the panelists provide their opinion on those, but we're going to talk about education sort of in general in the space. We're going to talk about credentialing, and we're going to talk about new business models that might be emerging. So with that, why don't we get to the first question? I'll ask it in general, then I'll let each one of you go through, and towards the end of the session, I'll save some time for some audience questions as well. But how have schools, universities, and even private organizations, educational organizations, responded to the surge, popularity, and overall demand of crypto or blockchain-related skills? And with that, what are the 1 or 2 core challenges that remain in that? So why don't we start with you, Saul?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is, at least at Bentley, that interest sort of waxes and wanes at the university, depending on what's going on with the crypto markets, quite honestly. There was a lot of interest in 2020, 2021. The administration was really looking at blockchain, was really looking at how it could be incorporated into some of the classes. And then when the crypto crash happened, that sort of dissipated a little bit. And then I think what's also happened is AI came in. I know AI is one of the themes here, and AI has really kind of taken a lot of the air out of the room when it comes to blockchain. And so there's a ton of discussion across the university about, AI. How can the university leverage AI? How can students understand AI, and how AI is really one of the technologies of the future? Blockchain hasn't totally gone away. It just doesn't have the same prominence as it had a few years ago. And I think that I'm hopeful that that's going to change. There are actually some things afoot at Bentley that I think are very promising and that show that it hasn't been forgotten.
Thank you very much. Len.
Okay, so as I mentioned just a moment ago, I do teach a course on blockchain for both undergrads and graduate students. It's an elective and it's oversubscribed and has been for a couple of years. What's of note is that the ability to understand business as it moves forward is, in my opinion, very much driven by your ability to understand and leverage technology. And I think that while this course is an elective, there are enough other courses within the curriculum that sort of, at least at Boston College, instill that in students that they really need to be cognizant of underlying technology and what it can provide. And so when they see a course on blockchain or a course on cybersecurity management, and of course on AI, depending on their schedule and everything, they try to get into whatever they can at that term. Within the course itself, over the course of years, I've said, how many of you have been involved in blockchain previously? And a few years ago, that was basically a blank slate. There was very few, if any. And today, I would say the majority of the students in the course either are involved in some startup-related work, in a club, there's a Boston club, of course, or perhaps in one of their other courses. So I teach at the business school. There are other courses in the computer science department and mathematics department because, as you all know, blockchain requires that level of technical expertise and depth, which a computer science course can give, and is not appropriate for the business school student.
Yeah, I think there's a couple perspectives you could take when looking at this. One is like the students and what are they thinking, right? And I think you have seen a pretty increased demand, and students are interested in this type of thing now. I think you can look at it from the, say, professor and academic side, and then you can look at it from the administration side. And I think from the administration side, that is probably the lowest on the spectrum. Like, no administrator in higher ed is thinking about blockchain right now. They're thinking about budget cuts and federal funding and those kinds of things, right? And so getting that on their priority list of the president and provost is not very high at the moment. I think what the professors are starting to see more and more in that, as the students are showing interest in it, But I still think there's a ton of room to grow, especially like there's very few institutions, if any, that are offering like PhDs in blockchain. Like that doesn't really exist yet, and so I think there's a lot of ample opportunity for many institutions to continue to be leaders in this forefront. But their higher ed is kind of the dinosaur; like it doesn't change quickly, right? And so I think that is obviously because this is such a cutting edge thing. I think as Sol was saying, there's kind of the ups and downs of like, oh, there's artificial intelligence, there's blockchain, there may be kind of hype things that come along, and I don't think blockchain has quite found its footing in higher ed at the moment.
If I can say one other thing, and that is, I think too, blockchain, and Len, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about this, has also not suffered, but it's been held back a little bit because I don't know if there have been as many faculty who are familiar with blockchain as are necessary to teach it. And so I know that it's difficult sometimes to find faculty who are dedicated to it. I think once again, that's changing also as time goes by. But I know like 5 or 6 years ago, there just weren't as many people who were on the faculty side who were as involved with it. So it was hard to find people to teach these classes.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to get sort of the panel's take on this. Where does this live, right? You mentioned we don't have a doctorate or PhD necessarily or robust programs in blockchain, but my experience has been to view it as a multidisciplinary topic, that it's a bit of history, it's a bit of economics, it's a bit of computer science, it's a bit of business, heck, it's even a bit of digital art to a degree. So where do you see this residing, and how do you see that playing out?
I think it has to be computer science in some sense, right? Because if you truly want to have like, if you're going to give someone a doctorate in blockchain, but they can't code a computer, that's kind of hard to do. And so I think that's where it's probably going to have to end up living, even though the business students right now are probably the ones that are most interested in it.
If I could add that, I think there's no one place, okay? Thinking about Boston College or other schools in the area that I'm familiar with, there are courses at the business school or in the economics department, because when you think blockchain, there's the business applications, there's very much the financial cryptocurrency, stablecoin, Genius Act, all of the things that were, all the new things over the course of the last 12 months, that's driving a lot of the economics course development as well. And I've seen economics professors, who are curious about what I'm doing, and also finance professors within the business school who teach a separate finance course on blockchain and stablecoin. The idea of, what that all means really is interesting, because blockchain is a separate payment rail, and that's a finance issue. There's also the options issues as it relates to hedging and all of that on blockchain, which is very much finance. I cover the business applications. In the same way, the computer science folks, I was speaking with one a few days ago, is working on some research related to the security of the encryption algorithm within blockchain and how that can be extended for the next 20 years. Clearly not something I'm going to get involved with with my MBA students, or is the finance professor going to get involved with? So I see it as finance, economics, strategy, and of course computer science. There are, although not at Boston College, I've also worked with some professors in the arts and humanities, more specifically music schools, where they're trying to figure out how all the royalties that are being worked on, basically a royalty payment system. And so music students are not surprisingly, very, very interested in that going forward. So music schools are also, while they don't have a course, are bringing folks in for guest lectures to say, here's what's possible.
All right, fantastic. I think that is a great segue to our second question. We were talking about, where does this live in terms of which department and what types of credentials maybe somebody might have. So let's talk about that in general. How, like digital credentials in themselves, how do you view the role and impact of blockchain verified digital credentials in higher education and in training in general, and professional training? So.
Yeah, why don't you take that, please?
Yeah. So I think that, like a lot of things in the world, digital credentials are going digital. I mean, right now, a lot of institutions still issue paper. I think that's going to change. And I think if that's changing, then blockchain makes a lot of sense for the technology platform to underlie it. Generally, it's less expensive, it's cheaper, it's more open, it's more durable, right? If you have a certain company that's issuing a digital credential and it goes out of business, what happens to that credential? That's not a problem if you do it on the blockchain. And so I think blockchain, people ask, what is blockchain good for? That's what I hear a lot from people outside. Well, this to me is like tailor-made for blockchain. And so I think while this change is happening, while we're going from paper to digital, this is an opportune time for blockchain to really be a solution to a problem that really exists out there. I think I read the other day that 40% of resumes have false information on them. That's something blockchain can change. 30% of LinkedIn profiles have false information. So it's really a much more efficient way to take that credential information and then be able to verify it on the other end.
Awesome, thank you. Len, or Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, and then I'll
He's
take
giving me the honor. So,
Oh, okay.
no particular order.
no, I would say I think if we really think what higher education is, right? I would assume some folks in this room have gone to higher ed. Like, you spend a lot of money, you get a piece of paper. That's what you get at the end, essentially. It's a credential, right? And certain of those pieces of paper, people are going to look at them like, oh, wow, you went there, right? There's certain ones that get that more of a reaction factor. It gets you the job interview kind of thing, right? And so I think, to Sol's point, like, higher ed has had a monopoly on those credentials for such a long time. And certain schools are more desirable than others. And I think that you're going to start seeing some, let's call that more innovative universities, right? Not the top 25, but there's probably a middle section there. They're going to be willing to lean in and say, hey, we are willing to do these more digital type credentials, right? There's things like Creditly or someone's been trying to figure this out for a long time, and I think that blockchain is something that's going to make that a bit more acceptable in the long run, and I think you're going to see some higher education institutions actually willing to do that here in the coming years, but it's going to take time to change and get them to understand the benefit behind it.
And following a couple of points that were just made, I'm reluctant to say the school because if I get it wrong, I'm going to really hear from them later. But a private school went out of business last year, and all the folks who had spent time there and had graduated or were about to graduate, they basically stopped answering the phone and stopped responding to email, and had their certificates and for specific courses or their diplomas been available on blockchain, the fact that the company, it was a private educational company, had gone out of business, that's a shame, but so be it as far as the student perspective is concerned. The other is that while we're talking more about diplomas here, if you fine-tune it a little bit or slice and dice it a little bit more, it's per course as well. And there's very much, I've seen a lot of activity in that as well, where individual courses can now be certified. And that leads to another change in the business model for perhaps later. And I found it also interesting that it's not just the largest schools that are looking at digital certificates or diplomas, but the University of Rome a few years ago switched to a digital, I assume if they still have paper, but also their diplomas are available via blockchain, and they said they're saving tens of thousands of dollars by issuing the certificates in a digital form.
If I can add a point, just to what you're saying there, like there's a database run by the federal government, I think IPEDS database, which is a list of all the institutions across the country. That number's been getting smaller every year, and it's going to continue to cascade more and more. There's what's called the demographic cliff that started this year, technically, in higher ed, where people stopped having kids about 18 years ago, or didn't have as many, and so there's a lot less students going to college, and there's going to continue to be a large number of schools closing every single year. And I think to your point, if I graduated from that institution, like, can I still get my transcript? Like, what happened to that? Where is it? And there's ways we could do that on the blockchain.
Yeah, that leads up to a quick follow-up before our third topic, because I want to get your guys' opinion on where do you think the push is going to come from, right? Is it coming from the registrar's office? Is it coming from like platforms like LinkedIn? Is it coming from employers? Or is it also coming from like cost savings initiatives in the face of some really changing realities for higher education? And I'll open the floor to that.
I think it's going to come from the registrar's office, quite honestly. I think speaking to registrars, they know that they have to make the change, and they know that their cost savings that they can get from that change. And so I do think that they'll be listening to other pressures. They'll be listening to students who are saying, are you really still just giving me a paper credential? So it'll be part of the university experience. But I think ultimately it's the registrars who are going to lead that change.
Yeah, I think in terms of credentials, it'll probably register, or just the idea of like cost savings will be kind of the reason why we would be willing to do something like that. I think they would tack innovation on as a nice to have, but people are going to make decisions based on financials in some sense. And I think that we've talked a little bit over the years of like just like stable coins and taking tuition payments in those. Like there's ways they might be able to reduce fees and make a little more money at the top. Education is a business, right? And so I think those will be kind of the drivers as opposed to, oh, we think blockchain is such this innovative idea. That'll be a plus, but the main will be financial.
I'm all set. All right, so I think that's a good segue to our third sort of topic. We're talking about what market forces might drive this. So what types of new learning business models and new education models do you see emerging from this intersection of blockchain and AI?
So I guess I've mentioned that already, but thank you for it's like I sort of see two sort of let me speak to that at first a very high level, and then maybe a more pragmatic day in, day out level. At a very high level, it's been, stepping back, it's been maybe 20 years since the first conversations were held about what was called the Open University or the Meta University. This was well before the name change to Facebook, or other global universities, where there was the idea that given the right administrative overhead and overlay, it would be possible to create a degree that would be appreciated in the world by pulling together courses and materials and research from multiple universities and multiple non-universities and create a degree. And I can give you a reference to one from 20 years ago. And we've seen some models in that respect with something like edX from a dozen years ago, well, perhaps about a dozen or plus years ago, which was done as a consortium and then went private, was sold. And Coursera, again, now private, well, very much private and public actually, meaning non-consortium, and so it's a private, it's a publicly traded firm, to be clear, as is the edX environment. But blockchain, I think, gives us the opportunity to revisit that and actually have it be a non-centralized educational environment with an appreciated degree, because individual courses, completion of courses, grade, that can be all done via DAOs if properly done. And that's one sort of high level. At a more pragmatic is, remember, a university is there to teach, but given our wonderful universities in this area and throughout the US, of course, and the world, there's also the other emphasis in universities is research. And a major part of research is publishing. There's funding, there's actual execution of the research, and then for all professors who are interested in tenure track, there's very much the publishing aspect. Publishing is very much something that is today being quite changed, quite influenced by the availability of blockchain. So I see that as another model change going forward.
Awesome, thank you. Saul, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that, the way that universities even can fund themselves will change.
Yeah.
I think that some will start to accept crypto. We've already started to see that. They'll accept crypto from their alumni. So not only is there going to be a change in the way that information is disseminated, but I think it's going to change the way that the universities are administered also.
Yeah, 100%. Can you guys give me your kind of thoughts on that? I know, Matt, you want to say something.
Yeah, well, and I think that ties into both topics here. So I think, again, there's different perspectives to look at the different stakeholders, right? So there's students, there's professors, and there's faculty. Students, again, I think the whole thing that, whether it's edX or these MOOCs, or like someone is going to crack that nut eventually of like, how do we have a decentralized credential that anyone can learn from Boston to Africa to Beijing? Like, how can we make sure that they're all getting the same quality education? And it's not LinkedIn Learning where you like hit play and then put it in the other window and get your little certificate, right? Like it needs to be better than that. So I think that's kind of from the student perspective. I think from the professor perspective, right, and we won't fall into this whole here, but like H scores and just like research, and there's a lot to be done there because the world has been driven forward by professors doing great research, and that has to continue, right? So we need to figure out a way to do that kind of in the blockchain sphere. But I think from the professors and the governance, from the administration and the governance, there's a lot of administration that's just kind of bloated at this point. There's a lot of people there, and like what value is being contributed, and I think there's ways you're going to start seeing more efficiencies. I mean, it's kind of been spurred by the federal government over the last 10 months or so. I think you're going to see, like we talked about earlier, I think the financial, like, can we use blockchain to make this simpler? Can we use AI to make this simpler? Like, can we learn faster? Like, what, if you think about for-profit corporations, right, like, getting them to use the internet, right? 20, 30 years ago, they weren't all using the internet. Now, if you don't have email, like, you can't be a company, right? Like, I think the same thing is going to slowly happen with blockchain and artificial intelligence, and you'll see that in higher ed eventually, but it'll take some time.
Awesome, thank you. We've got just over 2 minutes left, so I just wanted to leave a minute or two for any questions that the audience might have for our panelists today. Yes? Thank you very much for the mic.
Removing endowments from my question, do you see universities going the way that many companies are going, where they're using treasury management from a crypto perspective or Bitcoin on their balance sheets beyond Saul, what you just described, and how that can change?
Short answer, I'd say a very small amount. Like, we're doing a lot of budget model reorgs in higher ed these days, but you're like their endowment, right? Their endowment isn't 100% crypto. So same thing internally, like with their day-to-day, month-to-month budgets, it would be a very small amount, if anything, in the short term, from my perspective at least. I don't know if anyone has different opinions.
I mean, from what I've seen, I think universities are stepping very gingerly into that. You know, I don't know if there are any that have actually are actively doing it, but I'm sure that they're starting to think about it a little bit. So, yeah.
Awesome. We have time for one more.
So, in addition to the more credential proof, so I went to MIT, as did my wife. We live in Miami now. We don't encounter a lot of alumni, but we'll routinely encounter someone on LinkedIn who did a weekend online certificate course at MIT and lists themselves as an alum. And this is on LinkedIn. It's not technically fraud, but I would think the universities would have an incentive to preserve their brand a little more. And how can blockchain kind of help with that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what blockchain can help with, because you can have a blockchain system that allows you as the viewer of that profile to see exactly the type of degree that they received, right? Whether it's on LinkedIn or whether it's on some other social media. And you can see that they got a certificate from a 2-day course at MIT versus, you know, an undergraduate degree, a BS. And so I think that does help the university. It helps the general public because you know exactly the credential that the person's received. So that's one of the big problems I think that blockchain can help to solve.
All right, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the time. If you guys have additional questions, our panelists will be available real quick after the session here. But thank you very much. Appreciate you all, and have a great week here at Boston Blockchain Week.